So have you ever had a moment where reality just felt, I don't know, slightly off? Like you're going about your day, getting coffee, walking to your car, and suddenly a coincidence happens that is so hyper precise, so impossibly specific, that it feels totally arranged.
Oh, absolutely. Or, maybe you're walking down a street you've literally never been down before in your life, and you get hit with a feeling of déjà vu that is so vivid, so deeply visceral, it actually stops you right in your tracks.
Yes, exactly. It feels like a memory of something that absolutely never happened, yet your entire body is telling you it's real.
Right. And the standard, entirely reasonable response to that sensation is to just dismiss it out of hand. I mean, we tell ourselves that our brain's misfired. We chalk it up to a quirk of human neurology.
Yeah, a little synaptic hiccup.
Exactly. Just a hiccup where short-term memory accidentally routed through long-term storage. So we brush it off, we take a breath, and we just keep walking.
We do, because honestly, the alternative is deeply unsettling. But today, we are unpacking a stack of sources, specifically some incredibly detailed excerpts from a text called The Digital Veil. And the mission of this deep dive is to look at a small number of serious thinkers who ask a fundamentally different question about those strange moments.
Yeah, what if they aren't brain quirks? What if they are actual glitches?
Right. What if our reality is, well, a generated computational environment?
But to explore that effectively, we need to completely strip away the Hollywood veneer right now. I mean, we are not talking about science fiction today.
No, definitely not.
We aren't discussing movies with slow-motion bullet dodging or, cyberpunk novels. We're looking at a highly serious philosophical and mathematical argument. It possesses a very precise logical structure.
And we're going to evaluate that logical structure completely impartially. It's vital to understand that mathematicians and physicists treat this as a legitimate hypothesis, not a fantasy.
Exactly. We are taking the math seriously.
But I am fully committed to exploring the depths of the idea with you listening. But I will admit right up front, this topic really gets under my skin. I mean, it is fascinating, but it makes me deeply uncomfortable.
No, same here. It's totally unnerving.
Yeah, and neither of us has the definitive answer here.
Yeah.
We are not here to dismiss the idea as crazy,
Yeah.
but we are absolutely not here to confirm it either. We are navigating the dark just as much as you are.
I share that discomfort entirely. Because when you actually look at the central tension of today's deep dive, it centers on two recent peer-reviewed mathematical papers from late 2025. And this is where the academic conversation becomes incredibly strange.
Right, because they completely contradict each other.
They really do. So one team of researchers claims to have mathematically proven that our universe fundamentally cannot be a computational environment. They use rigorous math to demonstrate that a generated reality is impossible under the laws of physics.
Yet just a month later, a completely different team publishes a mathematical framework suggesting that computed universes could be just as powerful, just as complex as the base reality running them.
Which is wild and also peer-reviewed, also utilizing incredibly rigorous, heavy mathematics.
Both teams reach the exact opposite conclusions. Somebody is fundamentally wrong about the nature of our reality, but as of right now, nobody knows who.
Which is a genuinely thrilling place for science to be. But to understand why this is causing such intense debate right now, I think we have to start with the sheer uncomfortable logic of how this entire modern conversation began. It's an idea that revolves around statistical inevitability.
Right, so if we trace this back to its roots, we are talking about a thought experiment that, once you fully grasp it, tends to take up permanent residence in your brain.
It absolutely does. Let's break down the core statistical argument in very plain conditional language. It relies on a specific sequence of logic. Think of it as a series of cascading if statements.
Okay, I'm with you. Lay out the first if.
Step 1. If a civilization survives long enough to develop immense computing power, we're talking about computing capability far beyond anything we possess today. Imagine harnessing the entire energy output of a star just to run servers.
Wow.
Yeah, it's theoretically possible, assuming a species doesn't destroy itself first.
Right, so they make it through their technological adolescence without triggering a nuclear winter or engineering a biological collapse. They reach a stage of maturity where energy and processing power are practically infinite.
Precisely. Now, step 2. If they use that immense computing power to run environments containing conscious minds...
Like running a program, basically.
Exactly. Today, human scientists run simplified population models or evolutionary algorithms to study how societies might behave under stress. The argument assumes that a hyper-advanced civilization would run environments so deeply complex, with such high fidelity, that the digital beings inside those environments actually experience subjective consciousness.
Okay, I'm tracking with that. So they wouldn't just be simulating weather patterns. They would be simulating the internal subjective experience of the people standing in the rain.
Now for the final step. If those first two conditions are met, survival and capability, then logically, a civilization with that kind of power wouldn't just run one of these environments.
They'd run tons of them.
They would likely run millions or even billions of them. They might run them constantly for historical analysis, trying to understand their own past. They might run them for entertainment or to calculate the outcomes of different sociological decisions, which brings a heavy, heavy mathematical weight down on our own existence.
Because if you follow that to its logical end, the numbers become terrifying.
They really do.
Like, if there is one singular real universe, the base reality where the physical computers actually sit, but there are millions or billions of generated universes containing conscious minds. Mathematically, artificial minds would vastly outnumber naturally occurring ones.
Right. The ratio wouldn't even be close.
It would be billions of simulated minds for every one physical mind. Statistically speaking, if you were to blindly pull a conscious thinking mind out of a cosmic hat, the odds that you are holding a base reality mind are astronomically small.
Basically a rounding error.
Exactly. The odds that you, the person listening to this right now, are one of the rare, naturally occurring minds, rather than one of the billions of generated ones, drops to effectively zero.
That is the raw, unvarnished logic of it.
I find this statistical inevitability incredibly compelling.
Yeah.
When you lay out the sequence like that, it feels like an inescapable funnel. You just fall right down the logic tree and land on this staggering conclusion. You're almost certainly in a generated system. The math is just so elegantly airtight.
But can we ever actually test that?
Yeah, the empirical brick wall.
The logic is elegant, yes, but we have to push back thoughtfully here because that mathematical funnel rests entirely on massive, completely unproven assumptions.
Fair point. Like what?
Well, we are assuming that computing power can and will scale infinitely without hitting physical limits that we simply don't know about yet. We are also assuming that consciousness, the raw feeling of experiencing something, the redness of red or the pain of a burn, can even be translated into code. We don't actually know if consciousness is a computable process.
Oh, that's true. That changes the whole paradigm. I mean, we still don't even have a scientific consensus on how human biology produces consciousness, let alone how you would write a script for it on a microchip.
Exactly. Furthermore, we are assuming that human psychology applies to hyper-advanced civilizations. We assume they would want to run these historical reconstructions.
Right, projecting our own motivations onto them.
Yeah. Maybe an advanced civilization views generating billions of conscious, suffering beings as a profoundly immoral act, so they simply choose not to do it out of ethical restraint. Or perhaps they evolve past the desire to look backward at all.
So the math only works if we assume these supreme beings are basically just hyper-advanced versions of us, with our exact curiosity and our exact moral blind spots. That is a massive leap.
It really is.
But I want to point out to you listening that this underlying anxiety, this pervasive feeling that our reality might be a facade, is not some new paranoia born from the invention of modern computers. We've been wrestling with this exact same dread for thousands of years. We just used different vocabulary before we had servers and silicon.
The technology changes, but the doubt is ancient. It is a fundamental human insecurity.
Think about the ancient philosophical story of the man who dreams he is a winged insect.
Oh, I love this one.
The story doesn't just say he had a dream, it asks you to imagine the sheer immersive detail of it. In the dream, he is fluttering around, feeling the wind on his delicate wings, navigating the blades of grass. He is completely, utterly convinced he is this insect, with absolutely zero memory of ever being a human man.
Total immersion.
Right. Then abruptly, he wakes up. But instead of feeling relieved, he's struck with a profound, terrifying psychological paralysis. He looks at his human hands, and he is suddenly unsure of his true identity.
Is he a man or is he the insect?
Exactly. Is he a human man who just briefly dreamed he was an insect, or is he currently an insect, asleep under a leaf somewhere, vividly dreaming that he is a human man? The subjective experience of reality from the inside feels identically real in both states.
It highlights the ultimate problem of perspective, you know? You can only verify reality using the tools that reality provides you. If the tools are part of the illusion, well, They will only ever confirm the illusion.
And then fast forward slightly to another classic thought experiment, the disembodied mind hooked up to artificial inputs.
Right, a staple of modern philosophy.
Imagine a physical brain sitting in a jar of warm, oxygenated nutrients on a laboratory shelf, completely removed from a body. Now imagine scientists have hooked up microscopic electrodes to every single nerve ending in its sensory cortex.
Feeding it data.
Exactly. If a supercomputer is feeding perfectly precise electrical signals to that brain, simulating the cool feeling of the wind, the bitter taste of coffee, the vibrant sight of a blue sky, that brain has absolutely no way to know it is sitting in a jar.
None at all.
To the brain, the world it is experiencing is completely solid and real. The modern probability argument we are discussing today is just the digital evolution of that exact same ancient terror.
Which means this first debate ends in a draw. The statistical logic is incredibly hard to dismiss once you hear it, but the assumptions required to make the math work are vast, unproven, and rely on predicting the behavior of civilizations we cannot even fathom.
So neither side wins.
No. But if we move past the philosophical what-ifs, I think it's necessary to examine the physical mechanisms. Like, what would it actually take mechanically to pull this off?
Let's explore the logistics of that, because whenever I hear this theory, my mind immediately goes to the computational demands of running an entire universe. And it just seems impossible.
The scale is pretty daunting.
The cosmos is too big. There are trillions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars, each star interacting with countless planets, all the way down to the atomic level. The movement of every single electron. To track every atom in the universe simultaneously, in real time, the hardware required just breaks the brain.
It does, yeah. If you assume the system operates the way reality appears to operate when we look at it broadly. But what if we approach the architecture differently?
You mean efficiency mechanics?
Exactly.
Let me try an analogy here to see if this captures what you're suggesting. Think about playing a massive open-world video game. When your character is standing in a dense digital forest, the game engine is working hard to render the bark on the trees around you. The way the sunlight filters through the leaves, the grass swaying at your feet.
All right, the immediate environment.
But what about the digital city located 50 miles away on the other side of the map? The game engine isn't constantly rendering every brick, window, and person in that city while you aren't there.
That would just fry the processor for no reason.
Right. It just saves the data about the city to memory in a dormant state. It only actively renders the city when your character actually travels there and looks at it.
It's a fundamental trick of resource management. You only dedicate computational power to what is actively being observed by the user. I mean, why render a forest falling if no one is there to see it?
So apply that to the cosmos. Does a hypothetical system need to constantly calculate the chaotic, swirling nuclear fusion happening at the center of a star millions of light years away?
Probably not.
Or does it only need to render the tiny, faint pinprick of light that eventually reaches the lens of an astronomer's telescope here on Earth? Like, if nobody is looking at the dark side of the moon, does the dark side of the moon even physically exist in that moment, or is it just stored as a mathematical probability until a satellite points a camera at it?
Which brings us to one of the most hotly debated intersections in this entire topic. When we look at certain behaviors in quantum mechanics, the universe seems to operate with an eerie similarity to that dynamic rendering analogy.
I am so glad we are going here because this is where my mind just explodes. When you actually look at how subatomic physics operates, it doesn't behave like solid matter. It behaves remarkably like a computational rendering engine saving processing power.
We have to be incredibly careful with how we frame this so we don't misrepresent the science. But yes, there are behavioral parallels at the quantum level that make philosophers very uncomfortable.
Let's talk about the concept of measurement. At the absolute smallest levels of reality, when we are dealing with particles like electrons or photons, things do not seem to exist in a fixed, definite state until they interact with something or are actively measured.
They remain indeterminate.
Yes. Before measurement, they exist as a cloud of probabilities. They are literally in multiple potential states at once. Only when we observe them do they collapse into a specific, definite reality.
It's a very counterintuitive feature of nature.
Instead of the video game analogy, think of it like a book with completely blank pages. The story is determined, the data is there, but the text only physically storms into ink on the paper at the exact millisecond your eyes scan the page. The moment you look away, the ink dissolves back into potential.
That is a brilliant way to describe the observer effect. It suggests that reality is not strictly objective and concrete when nobody's interacting with it. It requires interaction to become solid.
Which sounds exactly like an efficiency mechanism. It's saving processing power until a conscious observer demands the data. And if we take that further, think about space itself. In physics, there's a concept of the absolute smallest measurable unit of distance.
The minimum possible length, yeah.
Right. It's incredibly tiny, billions of times smaller than a single proton. But the profound part is that it is a limit. You cannot theoretically measure a distance smaller than that. Space isn't perfectly smooth. If you zoom in far enough, it's blocky at the bottom. It's pixelated. This fundamental limit could be the literal pixel size of our reality.
But can we ever actually test that?
Oh, you got me again.
I have to ground us here because while the subatomic pixel idea and the blank book analogy are conceptually thrilling, they are ultimately metaphors. We are mapping our current technological understanding onto incredibly complex mathematics.
Which is pretty typical for human beings, to be fair.
Right. We live in a digital age, so we are imposing a digital framework onto physical phenomena. To a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To a society with computers, quantum mechanics looks like code.
I hear that, and it's a necessary reality check. Just because it looks like a pixel to my screen-trained brain doesn't mean the universe is actually made of pixels. It just means human language is limited.
Precisely. However, acknowledging our bias doesn't mean the mathematical exploration isn't advancing in terrifying new directions. We need to talk about that recent research, specifically the framework published in December 2025.
Okay, yes. Let's get into the recent stuff.
This was not just philosophical speculation over a beer. It was rigorous mathematical work that precisely defines what it would mean for one universe to generate another.
And what makes this December 2025 framework so deeply unsettling is how it attacks one of our biggest comfort blankets. Usually when we talk about simulations, we assume that a generated reality must inherently be simpler than the reality running it.
Right. A computer has to be more complex than the software it runs.
Therefore, every time you go down a level into a simulated environment, the universe has to get a little simpler, a little lower resolution.
That was the traditional assumption. A parent universe must be grander than a child universe.
But this new framework suggests that a generated universe could theoretically possess just exactly as much computational power as its parent universe. It totally eliminates the assumption that a simulated reality must be simpler. But how is that mathematically possible? How can the simulation be just as complex as the machine simulating it?
The mechanism they describe involves extraordinary data compression and fractal mathematics. Think of a fractal as shape that, no matter how infinitely you zoom into it, displays the exact same level of complex detail.
Okay, I can picture that.
The researchers suggest that if the base reality operates on holographic principles, where a vast amount of three-dimensional information can be perfectly encoded on a two-dimensional boundary, then a generated universe wouldn't require a universe-sized computer.
Oh, wow.
By utilizing perfect, lossless algorithmic compression, a child universe could hold an identical level of complexity without exceeding the parent universe's physical limits. It's essentially a mathematical one-to-one mapping of complexity.
That changes the entire paradigm of what we're discussing. If the parent universe and the child universe have absolute power parity, then the line between base reality and simulated reality starts to blur mathematically.
You lose the structural hierarchy entirely.
Yeah. A simulated universe could theoretically generate its own simulation with identical complexity on and on forever with no degradation in resolution.
Which is profoundly unsettling, if true. We are exploring these concepts seriously, but we must emphasize to you listening, we are not endorsing them as confirmed fact.
Right, this is all just theoretical mapping at this stage.
Exactly. This December 2025 framework explains how the architecture of such a system could theoretically work using advanced compression and holographic mathematics, but it does not prove that it is working.
Thank goodness.
And more importantly, as we mentioned at the start of this deep dive, there is an entirely different group of researchers who insist that the fundamental laws of nature forbid this entire concept entirely.
I desperately need a lifeline here, because the December framework is giving me total existential dread. Let's look at the mathematical counterweight.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about the October 2025 claim, where certain researchers claim to have mathematically demonstrated that the universe cannot be a computed environment.
Yes, the counter-argument.
And I want to throw a massive caveat right here at the start for the listener. This proof is highly contested in the scientific community. It is not the final word. But it is a very powerful, rigorous argument against everything we just discussed.
It is a formidable piece of logic. And to understand the October 2025 claim, we have to dive into the core of their counterargument, which relies on a concept known as the undecidability problem.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break down undecidability in very plain English. Because when we start getting into theoretical mathematics and algorithmic limits, it is very easy to lose the thread.
I will keep it grounded in the physical mechanics. The undecidability problem is the principle that there are certain fundamental physical facts, specific behaviors in the laws of nature, that simply cannot be computed or predicted by an algorithm. Not even in principle.
Wait, like not even with a massive computer?
Not even if you had a supercomputer the size of an entire galaxy running for 1 trillion years.
Wait, why not? An algorithm is essentially just a set of instructions, right? A highly complex recipe. Why couldn't a complex enough algorithm capture the physics of reality?
Because algorithms, by their very nature, operate in discrete, finite steps. They use digital logic, yes or no, 1 or 0, on or off. They move from state A to state B in distinct, measurable increments.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the October 2025 researchers argue that the universe does not operate in discrete steps. They argue that fundamental physical systems operate in a continuous, analog state.
Okay, let's unpack the difference between discrete and continuous, because that feels like the linchpin of their argument.
Think of the difference between a digital clock and a sweeping second hand on an analog clock.
Okay, I'm visualizing it.
A digital clock is discrete. It shows 12.00 and then instantly clicks to 12.01. There is no in-between state represented. It jumps. But the physical world, these researchers argue, is analog. It sweeps continuously through an infinite number of fractions of a second.
So it's smooth, not blocky.
Right. If you have a particle spinning, its angle of spin isn't just snapping into fixed positions. It requires an infinite sequence of decimal points to accurately describe its exact continuous physical state in any given microsecond.
So if I'm tracking with that, it means trying to run a simulation of our continuous universe on a computer.
Yeah.
Is like trying to run a program that requires infinite continuous memory. The program is calculating a number that never ever ends, and it needs all of those infinite digits active and interacting at the exact same time to function.
Yes.
Now imagine trying to run that continuous program on a standard discrete computer. It doesn't matter how advanced your hard drive is, or if you build a computer the mass of Jupiter. By definition, a computer must have finite storage. Its architecture is discrete. The computer doesn't just crash, it fundamentally rejects the premise of the program. The architecture of a computer is incompatible with true infinity.
That is an exceptionally precise way to visualize it. The researchers behind the October 2025 claim assert they have found specific quantum anomalies, highly specific behaviors in entangled particles that physically require the equivalent of that infinite continuous state to operate.
And so a computer couldn't do it.
Right. Therefore, no algorithmic system running on discrete logic could ever simulate them. If the universe contains even one purely continuous, non-computable element, the entire simulation hypothesis collapses. A computer cannot render infinity. Therefore, the universe must be base reality.
That is a staggering argument. It essentially says that reality is too messy, too beautifully infinite in its details to ever be boxed into code.
Exactly.
And there's another angle to this case against the simulation, isn't there? We aren't just talking about the abstract math of continuous infinity. We're talking about the sheer brutal physical constraints of astrophysics.
Yes. Beyond the abstract math of the undecidability problem, there is the raw reality of information storage. Certain studies propose that storing the complex quantum information of just a few hundred atoms requires more physical memory that exists in the entire observable universe.
I need to pause you there. A few hundred atoms.
Just a few hundred.
There are billions of atoms in a single grain of sand. You're saying that perfectly tracking the data of a few hundred atoms requires a universe's worth of hard drives. How is that even remotely possible?
It comes down to quantum entanglement. When particles become entangled, their states are linked. If you want to perfectly simulate them, you can't just record the state of particle A and particle B independently.
Oh, you have to track the relationship between them.
You have to record the entire web of probabilities connecting them. And as you add more particles, the amount of information required to track all their possible entangled relationships scales exponentially.
So it snowballs out of control.
Completely. According to certain physical models, by the time you reach just a few hundred entangled atoms, the data requirements become so astronomically vast that to physically build a computer capable of storing that data, You would need more mass and energy than exists in the cosmos.
That is insane.
To simulate the entire universe, the required hardware would be unfathomable.
When you lay out the astrophysical limits like that, alongside the undecidability problem, that argument carries genuine heavy weight. It makes the simulation hypothesis feel almost childish in its underestimation of reality.
I actually find deep psychological comfort in these constraints. When you look at the continuous nature of physics and you look at the absurd data storage limits of entanglement, it strongly suggests that the physical world is inherently authentic. It suggests reality is not a trick. It is an impossibly dense physical truth.
I respect that comfort, and the logic is incredibly sound based on what we know.
Yeah.
But I have to push back conditionally here. What if the computer running us operates on physics we can't even fathom?
How do you mean? We can only calculate based on the physics we observe.
Exactly, the physics we observe. All of our arguments against simulation, the discrete steps of algorithms, the storage capacity of atoms, the mass required to build a computer, are based entirely on the physics inside this environment.
Right.
But if we are in a generated environment, the base reality running the system doesn't have to follow our rules. In computer science, I believe this is called substrate independence.
Yes, the idea that a program doesn't care what physical material or substrate the computer is made of.
Exactly. Our computers are made of silicon and run on electricity.
Huh.
But what if the creator's computers aren't made of atoms? What if they have a form of continuous, non-discrete computation that we literally cannot conceptualize because our brains evolved to understand a discrete environment?
You are suggesting that our physical laws are merely local ordinances.
Yes. Arguing that the universe can't be simulated because a computer would need too many atoms is like a character in a two-dimensional video game, arguing that a 3D computer can't possibly exist because depth violates the laws of physics.
Ah, I see what you're doing.
If their physics are alien to ours, then all our astrophysical constraints are totally moot. They're just the artificial boundaries drawn on our local map.
That is the ultimate frustrating trump card of the simulation hypothesis, isn't it? Any evidence against the system can be instantly dismissed as a parameter programmed by the system itself.
Yep, it's unfalsifiable.
Which is precisely why this mathematical debate is essentially deadlocked in late 2025. We have peer-reviewed papers claiming it's impossible based on continuous physical states, and peer-reviewed papers mapping out how it works using fractal compression. Neither side can declare a definitive victory.
So if the math is deadlocked and we are effectively at a stalemate, I want to pivot this deep dive. Let's ask you, the listener, a completely different kind of question.
Okay, where are we going?
Setting aside the quantum mechanics, the undecidability proofs, and the data limits for a moment, let's open up a purely hypothetical exploration. If we assume, just for the sake of argument, that the probability logic holds up, what if it is true? What happens to our humanity?
We're moving from the mechanical to the ethical, the philosophical implications of living in a generated state.
Exactly. What does this all mean for us? The people waking up, making breakfast, mourning lost loved ones, and trying to find meaning in our lives. Let's talk about suffering, because this is the part of the thought experiment that gets incredibly dark.
It really does.
If our reality is artificial, a highly complex, generated environment running on an alien server somewhere, does it matter ethically? Let's say a digital consciousness is experiencing pain. Does artificial consciousness suffer less than real biological consciousness?
That is perhaps the most profound moral question we could ask in this entire deep dive. Because we have to consider the outside perspective, the perspective of the creators. To them, peering into the simulation, they might view us merely as complex data structures, variables interacting in an equation. If a line of code is deleted or a complex subroutine experiences a simulated negative feedback loop, which we perceive as pain or grief, an engineer in base reality wouldn't necessarily consider that an act of cruelty.
Just a Tuesday for them.
Right. To them, it's just a program running its natural course to yield data.
Which implies that our entire spectrum of human tragedy is just algorithmic output to someone else. But I strongly argue that the outside perspective is completely irrelevant to the experience itself.
How so?
To the person inside the system, the pain is absolute. The sudden physical agony of breaking a bone, or the deep, suffocating grief of a broken heart, or the despair of losing a child. Those feelings are 100% real to the mind experiencing them.
They are undeniable to the subject.
Exactly. If my consciousness is generated by squishy biological neurons or by incomprehensible alien processors, the subjective experience of suffering is identical. Therefore, the suffering is real, regardless of the substrate.
I agree with your assessment. The subjective reality of suffering dictates its moral weight. A simulated tear is still a tear to the eye that cries it.
Exactly.
Which immediately raises a massive ethical dilemma regarding the creator's responsibility. If they purposefully built a system capable of subjective suffering and they let it run, knowing the pain it would generate, what are their moral obligations to us?
That changes the whole definition of divinity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are they gods to be worshipped? Are they purely clinical scientists running a grand experiment? Or are they just alien kids playing a hyper-advanced video game in their basement, completely indifferent to the characters they're torturing?
It forces us to ask if the designers of this universe have a moral imperative to minimize our suffering. If they're actively watching this simulation run and they see war, famine, and disease ravaging the population, are they ethically negligent for not reaching in and interfering?
That's the classic problem of evil, just dressed up in code.
Exactly. Or, from a scientific standpoint, is interference a violation of the experiment's core integrity? If you intervene to stop a simulated war, you corrupt the data you were trying to gather about societal collapse.
That clinical detachment makes you wonder about communication. If they're watching, could we ever detect them looking in? Or, more importantly, if we are suffering, could we ever send a message to the system operators to beg for help?
Under the constraints of a programmed reality, how would you even begin to go about doing that?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But logically, maybe you do it by creating something so mathematically anomalous, so perfectly unnaturally ordered, that it forces the system to flag it as an error.
Oh, interesting. Like an intentional glitch.
Yeah, like building a physical structure or laser array that deliberately violates the rendered physics just enough to trigger an automated diagnostic check from the outside. You essentially try to crash the server just a tiny bit, leaving a message in the error log saying, hey, look down here, the code is self-aware and we are in pain.
That is a fascinating strategy, but it relies on a comforting assumption that they are monitoring the simulation at a granular individual level.
Oh, you're right.
Think back to the probability argument. If they are running billions of these environments simultaneously to study macrogalactic formation or the life cycles of stars, they might not even notice us. We might just be a total byproduct.
Like mold growing on the digital petri dish.
Exactly. They might not even know that conscious life accidentally evolved in this specific run of the program.
That is an absolutely terrifying thought, that we are a complete accident in a machine built for something entirely different, suffering in the dark, while the operator looks at the macro data of galaxies colliding.
It's very bleak.
But wait, I want to introduce the most mind-bending layer of this entire thought experiment. We've talked about the creators, but we need to talk about the recursive problem.
Ah, the infinite loop. The architecture of nested realities.
Yes. This is where the logic eats itself. If we accept the premise of the probability argument, that intelligent civilizations eventually build these systems, and therefore we are probably inside one, why on earth should we assume that our creators are residing in base reality?
Because the exact same statistical logic applies to them just as much as it applies to us.
Exactly. I mean, if we follow that to its logical end, if our creators are technologically advanced enough to build a universe-generating computer, they are highly likely to be the product of an even more advanced civilization.
So they might be simulated too.
Yes, and the civilization simulating them might be simulated by an even higher civilization. It could be layers of generated environments all the way up. An infinite, dizzying stack of realities, each one running the next, with absolutely no way to know how far down the computational chain you actually are.
It is the ultimate dilution of existence. If there are layers upon layers of simulations, the very concept of a base reality becomes almost mythic.
It's just out of reach forever.
It is so far removed from our level of existence, separated by potentially thousands of layers of rendered physics, that it practically ceases to matter. Base reality becomes a ghost.
I have to admit to you listening, going down this recursive loop makes my stomach drop. I feel physically dizzy even trying to visualize a stack of infinite universes. The implications are staggering. You start questioning the solidity of the chair you're sitting on, the air you're breathing.
It is deeply unsettling by design. And the truth is, neither of us can win this ethical debate.
No, we really can't.
There is no logical endpoint to the recursive problem, just as there is no clear ethical resolution to the suffering of artificial minds. We are merely unraveling these terrifying and fascinating threads together, seeing how far the logic stretches before it snaps.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the final, sobering limitation of this entire deep dive. We've talked about the probability math, we've debated the quantum rendering of a blank book, we've explored the undecidability problem of continuous physics, and we've spiraled into the ethical nightmare of infinite recursive loops.
But there is one giant, immovable shadow hanging over everything we've discussed today.
Right.
The ultimate limitation. And it beautifully explains why, despite all the 2025 mathematics, despite the rigorous frameworks, mapping complexity, and the contested proofs about infinite storage, this question may be permanently beyond empirical verification.
Why is that? Why can't humanity ever just invent a tool or solve an equation and figure it out for sure?
Because of the inescapable nature of the system itself. Any evidence we find, any test we run, any hyper-advanced telescope we build, or quantum anomaly we measure, all of it must occur entirely within the parameters of the environment.
Yeah.
If we find a glitch in the stars, we can never know if it's a true flaw in the rendering system or just a programmed feature deliberately designed by the creators to look like a glitch.
Because it's all data.
Exactly. If we mathematically prove, like the October 2025 researchers, that the universe is continuous and therefore cannot be algorithmic, we can never know if the base reality just programmed our brains to perceive the universe as continuous.
It's a perfectly sealed, closed box. You cannot use the tools inside the box to prove the box exists. Everything you see, touch, smell, or calculate is fundamentally compromised by the very real possibility that it was explicitly coded for you to see, touch, smell, and calculate.
Precisely.
Your own skepticism might just be a line of code executing as intended.
It creates a profound epistemological dead end. We can theorize forever, we can write brilliant mathematical papers, but we can never step outside the computational framework to look at the monitor.
This permanently untestable mystery. It connects so deeply to two other concepts we've explored in previous deep dives. It has that exact same haunting flavor of total unknowability.
Which specific concepts are you connecting this to?
Well, first, it connects perfectly to the deep, lingering mystery of why raw, subjective experience exists at all. We've talked before about how science can perfectly map the biological brain. We can track the exact electrical impulses of a thought moving across synapses.
Right, the mechanics of neurology.
But nobody, no scientist on Earth, can explain why it actually feels like anything to be alive. Science can explain the mechanics of the eye, but it cannot explain that invisible, internal movie playing in your mind when you see a sunset.
Yes, the sheer unquantifiable existence of inner awareness, the bridge between physical matter and subjective feeling, it remains a total mystery.
And second, it connects to the concept of reality constantly branching off into infinite alternate timelines. The idea that every time a quantum choice occurs, a new universe splits off, creating a sprawling, unimaginable web of infinite histories.
The many paths of reality.
Right. We can never interact with them, and we can never empirically prove they exist because we are permanently trapped within our own single linear timeline.
Both of those mysteries, much like the possibility of a generated reality, brush up against the absolute boundaries of our perspective. They highlight the very limits of what humans can observe from the inside.
They really do.
They are profound, beautiful questions that science can approach, but perhaps never fully penetrate because the observer is hopelessly trapped within the phenomenon being observed.
It really puts our place in the cosmos into a jarring perspective, or our place of the server rack, depending on how you look at it.
Indeed it does.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to address you directly one last time. We've covered heavy math, bizarre physics, and deep philosophical anxieties today. But there's one final thought we want you to take with you. Something for you to mull over on your own as you go back to your day.
It encapsulates the core paradox of this entire subject.
Imagine for a moment that an artificial environment is built perfectly. The rendering is absolutely flawless. The physics operate without a single measurable error or lag. The sensory inputs, the warmth of the sun, the taste of a meal, the feeling of holding someone's hand are entirely indistinguishable from reality, to the point that you, living inside it, can literally never, ever tell the difference. If it is that perfect, does the distinction actually matter? Is a perfectly simulated reality just another word for reality?